a letter buried in silence, and a truth too dangerous to read aloud. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axon. I love seeing our mystery circle grow. Tell me where you're tuning in from. Your voices make this journey special. Let's begin. If you try to sell me on destiny, you'll have to do better than a horoscope and a loud voice. In my experience, what we call fate is usually a sloppy appointment book and someone who shouldn't have had a screwdriver. That morning, the something was a knothole from a plank of old hardwood, a leather envelope, and a woman who walked into our front room with her jaw set like a prize fighter's before the bell. It wasn't a morning for destiny. It was a morning for routine, the kind that binds Nero Wolfe to the schedule like a ship to its anchor. He was upstairs in the plant rooms where orchids obey him out of long habit, and I was at my desk attacking mail like a man who hopes the mail will eventually stop coming. Fritz had deposited coffee with the stealth of a cat who knows the house better than gravity. We were in the hour when the brownstone breathed the soft contentment of endangered species, and it would have done so uninterrupted if someone hadn't pressed our bell with the insistence of a tax collector born under an unlucky star. I opened and had just enough time to decide whether she preferred plain talk or gents' club politeness. She made the call for me. "I need Mr. Wolfe," she said. It was a voice that had learned control the way most people learn to sleep, through repetition and not enough success. "And I can't be asked the usual questions at the door. Please." "Lady," I said, "I only have 3 usual questions, and none of them have felony attachments. Name, business, whether you mind waiting until the boss finishes telling a dendrobium where it went wrong with its life choices." Her fingers tightened on the strap of a worn leather carry case that would have looked at home in a history museum exhibit titled "Things People Trusted." She was 30, give or take 4 hard years, dark hair that made a point of not being tamed, and eyes that had been storing up sleep as a future project. The blouse was clean and the skirt had been ironed into surrender, but the shoes were patched and the leather had lost any illusions about glory. I didn't like the odds on gentility working, so I gave her the practical version of me and stepped aside. She came into the office and stood in the middle of our comfortable jungle like she intended to plant a flag. I waved her toward the red leather chair facing Wolfe's desk, and she ignored the rhythm of caution that most people get when they realize how much of the room is arranged to make men talk. "My name is Althea Morn," she said, as if honesty might sting if applied too slowly. "I want to hire Mr. Wolfe to stop a letter from being used." "That's specific," I said. "We've had requests to stop. Bullets, marriages, and tax audits. A letter is a first. Coffee?" She looked at the cup on my desk, recognized the sacred, and shook her head. "I haven't much time." "People never do," I agreed. "Unfortunately, Mr. Wolfe keeps his to himself from 9 to 11. Orchids. They wilt if he neglects them. He claims they don't, but he would. If you sit, you can tell me as much as you like, and I will promise to ignore everything you ask me to when it comes to bringing him up to speed." She sat and put the carry case on her lap, hands gripping it with practiced refusal. "I don't want to be melodramatic," she said. "Don't worry about that," I said. "The wallpaper soaks up melodrama. It's the verbiage we can't get out." The corners of her mouth twitched like a cat deciding which string to murder. She opened the case, reached in, and produced 3 objects: a worn plank with a knot the size of a folded dollar, a paper-wrapped bundle that looked like it contained sandwiches and probably wished it did, and a long, flat leather envelope secured by 2 tarnished clasps. She set them on Wolfe's desk. Most people tiptoe around that desk. She didn't. She placed them with the exactness of a person who knows where the danger is. "Do I need gloves?" I asked. "No," she said. "It's already dirty." I gave the plank a look. It was 1.5 feet long, peeled from a floor by somebody who knew where to pry, and the knot had a shallow cavity behind it, as if a small mouse with secrets had been living there. The paper bundle was heavy, the kind of heavy metal gives you when it wants to be uncooperative. And the leather envelope? That was old. old in the way paper gets when it has had important things folded inside it for a long time. "Miss Morn," I said, "if you want me to pretend I see a ghost, I need better lighting." "It's not a ghost," she said. "It's a letter. It's what's inside the letter. It's what happens if someone sees it and decides to end what I've spent 10 years building." She pulled air in like she didn't trust it. And I'm out of options. Footsteps thumped on the landing, which is Fritz's way of announcing the return of civilization and 283 pounds of professional immobility. Wolfe entered, large and displeased, wearing a mustard-colored vest that looked as if it had won an argument with a tailor and lost an argument with a gardener. He took in the plank, the envelope, and Althea Morn with 3 separate glances. The first 2 earned a frown, the last paused. "Good morning," he said, and made it sound like a closing argument. "Archie, what have you done?" "Practiced hospitality," he said. "This is Miss Althea Morn. She brought a souvenir from a floor and would like to hire you to stop a letter. The setup beats most of my mail." Wolfe moved to his chair, lowered himself into it with the dignity of a man accepting the inevitable, and pressed the button that would summon Fritz with beer because the world had turned again and needed steadying. He pinched his nose at the bridge, then looked at the objects on his desk as if they had outstayed a welcome he hadn't offered. "A letter," he said. "Miss Morn, why pray should I meddle in epistolary matters? The postal service displays adequate incompetence without my contribution." She didn't flinch. "Because the letter will ruin a man who deserves to be ruined," she said, "by being used by a man who doesn't deserve the tool." Wolfe's eyes, which do more work than his legs, sharpened. "An aphorism without a subject is an imposition," he said. "Identify your nouns." She smoothed her skirt, not for effect, but to make her hands do something that wasn't clinging. "The man who deserves to be ruined is John Carradine, the real estate developer." That got both of my eyebrows. He stole land, bribed inspectors, forced tenants out. He did it with clean hands, because other hands took the dirt. The letter proves one of those hands belonged to my father. She waited for the flinch, and found none. Wolfe does not flinch for fathers. He flinches for sources. "My father," she said, "was chief clerk of permits in the Department of Buildings. He died 6 years ago. The letter is from 17 years ago. He wrote it under pressure." Her voice thinned. "He took money once. Carradine's men had him by then and after that. I have spent 10 years building a housing non-profit, Mr. Wolfe. I have spent 10 years refusing checks with strings and accepting ones with ropes. We are about to bring suit against Carradine after a 4-year investigation, and now someone who knows about this letter wants me to trade silence for my suit." Wolfe drew beer, sipped, and put the glass down with a restraint that told me he felt like putting it down harder. "You possess the letter," he said, glancing at the envelope. "I possessed it yesterday. Today I don't know what I possess." She tapped the plank. "The letter was under my bedroom floorboards, inside the knot's cavity. I didn't put it there. My father did. I discovered it 6 months ago when a pipe broke. I knew I should turn it over to the state's attorney or to any number of friends who would become enemies if I didn't. But She looked at Wolfe, not for sympathy, for acknowledgement of a move on a board. I waited. And last night someone took it from my apartment. This," she tapped the leather envelope with one finger, "was in its place." "Someone removed a letter and left a letter?" I asked. "We are generous with stationery today." She unlatched the clasps and slid out a single sheet. I stood and reached it before Wolfe had to make a decision that required muscles, and skimmed. It was typed, not old, and the words were the kind that make a lawyer's day short. A polite demand that Ms. Althea Morn remove her non-profit's name from any action against Carradine Realty Development in exchange for the return of her property. It was unsigned, which is a signature of its own. "They know about the cavity," she said. "They knew where to look. They were in my bedroom while I was in the building, at a meeting that started at 7. I went home at 10. The board came up easy but quiet. They know how to be quiet. Wolfe cocked his head. The paper-wrapped parcel? He asked. She followed his glance and grimaced. I didn't bring it because I'm proud, but I thought you would say you needed everything. She unwrapped it to reveal a tool I've found under more than one sink and across more than one skull, a flat crowbar, paint-scraped, with the stubborn confidence of a man who has never lost an argument with nails. It was left leaning under my kitchen sink. That's new. They wanted me to know. Or to make you think you know, Wolfe murmured. And the plank. I cut it out myself this morning, she said. I don't know why, except that everything felt like the wrong place to leave a secret. I was tired of stepping over that knot. She met Wolfe's gaze without blinking. If she had brought tears, he would have resented them for being wet on his rug. She brought purpose. He can stand that. So, he said, folding his fingers over his paunch, you request that I recover your letter, prevent its use, and, I infer, permit you to proceed in your suit. Yes, she said. I don't have what you asked for last time I read about you. I don't have piles of money. I have some. I have more work. I have people who would be grateful if we kept what must be kept and revealed what must be revealed in that order. Last time you read about me? I asked. Her eyes slid to me. It was a profile. It called you a man who could make a straight line look like a question mark. I need someone who can make a question mark look like a straight line to the right people. Wolfe, who does not enjoy metaphors unless they come with tarragon, allowed a sigh. Who knows of the letter's existence besides you and the thief? She didn't hesitate. 4 people, by necessity, and 1 by error. She ticked them off with a finger for each. My board chair, Mira Belen. She's a lawyer and my oldest friend. She argued we should turn the letter over immediately. I argued for timing. Our investigator, Saul Panzer. Wolfe's eyebrows reached for altitude. He is mine. No, she said. Saul Vieira. He's ex-cop, good at knocking on doors that don't open. He doesn't like Mr. Panzer, if it helps. The third is my operations manager, a widower named Norman Kincaid. He handles our grants and knows how to find a decimal that has gone missing. The fourth is Professor Lionel Dorsey, who teaches urban history and volunteers with our archival projects. He verified that the letter's conditions, paper, ink, were right for the date. The error is a journalist named Lucy Brand. She overheard an argument and has been hovering like a hawk. And, Wolfe said, the other end of the wire, Mr. Carradine. No, she said. Not from me, not from mine. If he knows, it's because someone mentioned it on purpose. Or because someone you trust has an additional trust. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Miss Morn, I am loath to interpose myself between a man's past and a woman's ambition, but I am not immune to the lure of an insolent intrusion in my house. Someone has trespassed upon your boards and upon my patience. Archie. Yes, sir. Telephone Mr. Panzer. Engage him for the day, perhaps the week. I want angles. Miss Morn, for the present, your function is to inform. You will dictate to Mr. Goodwin a full account. Your discovery of the letter, its contents in substance, if not verbatim, the arguments made by your board, your steps since. Names, times, telephone numbers, and second thoughts. She exhaled as if the air had been changed out for something less cheap. You'll take the case, she asked. I have not said so, Wolfe replied. I've said I require information. If I accept, I will do so for a reason not necessarily congruent with yours, and I will not divulge it. If that is untenable, you may leave your objects and your regrets. She glanced at me, and I gave her one of my better neutral nods, the kind that says, this is how he flirts. She smiled, just, then set her shoulders. I can live with that, she said. Most do, I told her. Not all survive it happily. Dictation? Or do you prefer to write and let my typing pool shake itself to life? I'll talk, she said, and settled in, the leather case back on her lap like a sleeping animal you don't trust. While she laid out her story, I phoned Saul Panzer and got the soft grunt that counts for consent in that dialect. When I hung up, she was reconstructing the plumbing leak that had given her a date with the space under her bed. I took it down in shorthand that would have given a bored nun nightmares, and when she finished, I had 3 pages and a question chewing the side of my brain. "The contents," Wolfe said. "You have been coy." She swallowed. When she spoke, the words were careful, like a man carrying soup across a wobbly floor. "My father wrote that he accepted $5,000 from a man named Stephen Holt, who was then Carradine's counsel, in exchange for—" She shook her head. "In exchange for approving a set of permit variances that should never have been approved. The project was on 9th Avenue. What Carradine did after the variances, it was the beginning of what he built now." Dates: 17 years ago, March. The letter was addressed to no one. It was more— Her mouth twisted. It was a confession, written to be found in case of what my father was always afraid of. He died of a stroke. He was paranoid about more violent options. "And why keep such a document in your floor?" Wolfe asked. "Why in your room?" "Because my mother wouldn't look there," she said. "And because my father knew I would." Her eyes had grown bright, but not from water, from fury. If you haven't seen fury sit quietly in a chair and fold its hands, watch a woman who has built something out of a man's shame. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "I'm not asking you to absolve my father. I'm asking you to keep one man's fall from being used to help the man who pushed him." "A moral geometry," Wolfe murmured. "Very well." He leaned back. The chair received him like a throne that had learned patience from a donkey. "Archie. Present. Miss Morn will give you addresses and schedules for Miss Bellin, Mr. Viero, Mr. Kincaid, Professor Dorsey, and Miss Brand. You will ascertain their alibis for last evening between 7 and 10. You will, with Mr. Panzer, perform a cursory examination of Miss Morn's apartment to determine points of entry and exit, and you will inspect the neighbors' thresholds for marks consistent with that. He flicked a glance at the crowbar. "But do not be literal. The bar is a gift that may not correspond to a truth." "Understood," I said. "Do we ask nicely, or do I bring my toothbrush to the precinct?" "You will ask as Archie Goodwin asks when he expects to be told," he said. "Miss Morn, you will give me your keys. We will not misuse them. Your locks will be changed by evening." She slid a small ring free and placed it gently on his blotter, as if that too were a line drawn in something thicker than ink. "There is one more thing," she said. "I got a call this morning at 6. A voice told me a delivery would be made to your address by noon, addressed to me. I don't know what. I didn't think it would make you eager to have me here." "On the contrary," Wolfe said, "if someone proposes to stain my doormat, I prefer to be in a position to accept or decline." "Maybe not stain," I said, glancing at the crowbar, the plank, the letter. "But they sure want to redecorate." Wolfe closed his eyes, reopened them, and they were the cool gray that means the turbines have started. "Very well. We are disturbed," he said. "We shall respond. Miss Morn, you may go for the present. Mr. Goodwin will attend you to the curb and gather what he must on the way. If the delivery arrives, we will unbox it." She stood, her hands finally leaving the leather case with resentment for the parting. "Thank you," she said. "I understand you don't accept gratitude, only cash." "Not exclusively," Wolfe said. "On rare occasions I accept satisfaction." She looked at him as if she understood him better than he would prefer. She left her 3 talismans on the desk and followed me out to the stoop where June was trying on spring like a dress it intended to return. At the curb, a taxi idled. She paused before getting in. "I'm not exaggerating, Mr. Goodwin," she said. "Carradine has friends who don't tire. If I let this suit die, the people we fight for will notice. They always notice." "I notice too," I said. It's my job. Then notice this. She leaned in. I didn't tell Mr. Wolfe the full reason I waited. The letter mentions a name, not just my father's. A name that will make men line up to swear they forgot how to spell it. I want to keep that name buried if I can. Buried under the floorboards. What's the name? I asked. She hesitated, and then shook her head, climbed into the cab, and closed the door. The window rolled down an inch. If you find the letter, you'll find it, she said, and if you don't, I won't have endangered anyone by saying it here. The cab pulled away, and I watched the meter turn as if it were practicing for all the meters in all the worlds. When I went back inside, Wolfe was regarding the plank with a species of glower usually reserved for imbecilities of source. Archie, he said, observe the knot. I've observed knots before, I told him. This one, he said, is too smooth. He picked up the plank, not dramatically, with the fingertips, and held it close. The cavity behind the knot had a dark ring along the inner edge, a faint smear that looked like soot or the residue of heat. Someone softened the pitch to widen the hollow, Wolfe said. Recently, the thieves did not find a cavity. They completed it. Which suggests, I said, that the letter was not originally inside the knot. It was under the board. And someone who removed it wanted Miss Morn to believe they merely followed her father's cleverness, Wolfe said. He set the plank down with relief, as if it had been making noise. We have an opponent who composes scenes. I dislike theatricals. Me too, I said. They keep doing rehearsals in the bedroom. The doorbell rang. Fritz's footsteps approached from the hall. He appeared, wearing the expression he reserves for packages with unknown return addresses and casseroles from neighbors with untraceable cheese. A messenger, sir, he said, for Miss Morn. Wolfe made a small sound as unmusical as a snapped twig. Bring it, he said, carefully. I stood, flexed the fingers I use for non-dramatic interventions, and prepared to open something that destiny had mailed special delivery to a man who hates fate and is exactly what it deserves. Fritz brought the package on a silver tray. If doom is calling, we keep house rules, and set it on Wolfe's blotter like a casserole from a neighbor we don't trust. The messenger slip read Midtown Dispatch, cash, walk-in, no sender. I caught the runner on the stoop. He had a schedule for a memory and a tip jar for a soul. Pick up at a print and ship on 48th. Sealed by the customer, no name. That was a mood, not a lead. The box looked innocent. White cardboard, bakery twine, no return address. Wolfe crooked 2 fingers. I obliged. Resin met me under the lid, pine and faint. Inside, a new leather folder lounged like an understudy. It held 3 items. A single sheet of old bond cut clean across the middle, a tiny glass vial with amber pitch dried at the lip, and a typed note that despised signatures. Wolfe read the note without lending it dignity. Miss Morn. Cooperate, and the remainder will be returned. Noon proves reach. 3 o'clock today, Washington Square Arch. South Bench. Bring your keys. He let it fall. Trite. The paper was the lower half of a letter. The watermark blinked. The signature shouted, Edwin Morn. Above it, enough to sour breakfast. Received monies in the sum of 5,000. Then a clause promising a name, severed at the blade-straight cut. The edge had been warmed, then kissed with soot. Our vial explained the perfume. Keys, I said. They want hers. Tokens, Wolfe said. Theatre. We will not bring keys. We will bring a premise. He nodded. Telephone Miss Morn. She's not to go. You will. Afterward, her apartment with Mr. Panzer. I require how, not drapery. Althea took the news like something she had budgeted for. They'd pick the arch, she said. They like monuments. I'll stay away. I'd also like faces to go with their courage. Working on it, I told her. Saul Panzer met me outside her building, an unremarkable length of overcoat the street forgot as soon as it passed him. We bribed the super with sincerity and a folded bill, then used Althea's keys on the third-floor door. The wood wore no pry marks, the strike plate no tears, but a faint horizontal scrape lived under the latch, thin as a lie told by a gentleman. Saul knelt, dabbed the jam with a swab, sniffed. "Contact cement," he said. "Fast set." They carded the latch and reset it after. Inside, the bedroom looked like a life with time only for purpose. The rectangle where she had cut the plank was neat, bright wood staring back. The crowbar found under her sink didn't match any leverage scars. Saul weighed it. "Prop," he said. They prefer iron to suggest force. The living room sash had a hairline of clear tape where a blade had freed paint. The kitchen toe kick under the sink wore a fresh scrape at ankle height. On the floor seam, I fished up a shred of grey nitrile. In the trash, under coffee grounds and a tenant rights flyer, a corner of gauze that smelled like our pine note. We bagged both. The bathroom trap gave Saul a ribbon of black he lifted onto another swab. "Rubber," he said. "Shoe dust." Neighbors produced the usual harvest of nothing. A woman 3 doors down delivered the dividend. Insomnia, couched near the peephole, and loyalty to curiosity. 9:30, she said, 2 men whispering like they were allergic to being heard. Something clinked. I peeped. Empty hall, then a cap went downstairs without a head under it. She handed over a small squeeze bottle she'd found by her mat. Needle tip, the kind used to lay a thin line. It smelled like our vial. I promised gratitude with numbers. I phoned Wolfe from the sidewalk. He listened and made the sound he saves for sources that have obeyed. "Competence," he said, "and affectations. Proceed to the arch. Observe. Do not arrange." Washington Square at 3 o'clock is an audition. I took a bench with shade and a clean angle on the south side, paperback open, camera idle. At 3 on the dot, a man in a navy suit and a cap that had lost its youth sat at the appointed bench, crossed his legs, and rested a slim portfolio by his ankle. He had the posture of a clerk trying to act like a lamp post. He looked at nothing too deliberately. 10 minutes later, a woman rolled up with a stroller, parked for half a minute, and rolled away lighter than she'd arrived. The portfolio under the bench had been switched for its twin. 5 minutes after that, a cyclist ghosted past and hooked the new case with a tow. I took pictures of all 3 acts: cap, stroller, bicycle. Nobody spoke to me. If theater was the goal, they got a review. The dispatch office admitted the job had been subcontracted to a cash special. The 48th Street clerk remembered glasses, a cap, crisp bills with a rubber band, and a request for a bakery box. He did not remember a face. Back at the brownstone, the harvest went on Wolfe's desk. The lower half of the letter, the squeeze bottle, the glove shred, the photographs, my notes. Wolfe tapped the cut edge and closed his eyes for one precise breath before resuming his ownership of the chair. "Someone is composing," he said, "not merely stealing. The widened knot, the crowbar, the bakery box, the arch, the demand for keys. Episodes. He intends Miss Morn to endure her predicament as a string of staged consents. The half-letter is rationed diet. The resin, a flourish." "Phooey." "Do we applaud?" I asked. "Or heckle?" "Neither. We invite him to dine unannounced." He pressed the buzzer for Fritz. Beer, and then interruptions. "To me? Call Ms. Balin, Mr. Viero, Mr. Kincaid, and Professor Dorsey. 8 o'clock. If anyone demurs, say I prefer not to involve the police yet, but cannot guarantee forbearance. Invite Miss Brand at 9, irritants after food." Mira Belenin sounded like a gavel you'd want on your side. She would come and would not bring a client list. Saul Viero said he disliked being summoned and disliked me more. He would attend to prevent foolish talk about locks. Norman Kincaid asked if coffee would be served. I said. Our coffee holds passports. Professor Dorsey was delighted. I told him to bring only his memory. When I hung up, Wolfe had the plank on his knees, the soot-ringed cavity turned to the window. Heated recently, he said. Applied drama. Your swabs corroborate a latch trick. The adhesive is the same motif in several bars. Our composer enjoys patterns. Which narrows it to anyone who shops for glue, I said. But the cap is doing heavy character work. Cap, stroller, bicycle, he murmured. Mutual anonymity. An efficient chain breeds unreliable pride. Someone will wish to claim authorship. We shall give him a room in which to boast. What do I tell Althea? That we are not deceived, that inevitability is the laziest tyranny, and that she is not to utter a syllable about the half-letter to anyone, including a mirror. The name on the missing portion, she withheld it for cause, must be spent once, and I will choose the occasion. You suspect the name, I said. I prefer to be correct before being explicit, he said. Attend to our door at 8. We are about to let strangers disturb my house under supervision, which is the only tolerable kind. At 8 sharp, the bell began earning its keep. I took coats and measured faces while Wolfe stayed planted, turned a few degrees toward the door like a sundial that resents weather. Mira Belen came first, compact and contained in a slate suit that made a statement. I have time for this, but only because I choose justice for dessert. She shook my hand like she was reading the brief on it, and gave the office a once-over that missed nothing and admitted less. Sol Viero arrived next with the creak of leather that had absorbed more precinct benches than church pews. He had a boxer's nose and the kind of smile that shows teeth only when rent is due. Norman Kincaid trailed with a canvas tote, apologizing to the hat stand for colliding with it, a gentle man with careful hair and a tie from the era when sincerity dressed itself. Professor Lionel Dorsey made 4, wrapped in enthusiasm, and a scarf with maps on it, spectacles alight as if we'd set out hors d'oeuvres of footnote. I placed them in the red chairs, the yellow chair, and the one that always squeaks for sinners. Wolfe lifted a palm. You have been invited, he said. For my convenience, you will earn it by brevity. He looked at Mira first. Miss Belen, your relation to Miss Morn? Friend, counsel, occasional conscience, she said. Mostly I try to keep her from lighting matches around dry kindling. And the letter? She showed me in April. I told her to turn it over and recuse herself from any tactical decisions. She refused to be immaculate in theory while losing in practice. We compromised. We'd pursue the civil case, and the letter would become public only as necessary, and only when its full context was prepared. Prudent, Wolfe said. And last night, in a deposition until 10, I left co-counsel and the stenographer to argue commas. She slid a card across the desk, with times scribbled in a precise hand. They'll answer if you ring. Wolfe nodded once and turned the grey gaze on Viero. Mr. Viero, you investigated Carradine for Miss Morn. Yeah, he said. His voice carried gravel. 4 years, dead tenants, shell charities, inspectors who can't explain second homes. I knock, they slam, then I find back doors. And you advised Miss Morn regarding the letter? I told her it was a hot potato in an oil fire. I said lock it up somewhere only a judge can open. He leaned back. She thought timing mattered. I think not losing matters. Last evening? Stakeout on 10th. A contractor who suddenly wears new shoes. Got pictures of men who don't like cameras. I can produce a diner receipt and a waitress who thinks I'm a better tip than talk. There was the smile. It didn't improve. Kincaid, Wolfe said, turning. You administer money. I try, he said, and tapped the tote. Grant calendars, audit trail summaries. We run clean because dirty makes poor people poorer. I saw the letter once. I told Althea we could absorb any fallout if we prepared donors for a storm. She said storms teach roofs who they are. Where were you? Home with my son. Wednesday night is chess and losing to an 11-year-old who treats me kindly afterward. We finished at 9:15. He called mate at 9:11 if you like precision. You can ring his mother, she asked when he started humiliating me. Professor, Wolfe murmured. Dorsey sat forward eagerly. A remarkable find, he said. The bond is period, a local supplier. The ink, iron gall, late 20th century variant. The phrasing, not bureaucratic. It reads like someone who doesn't write for a living but has begun counting his verbs. I told Miss Morn that the letter carries the aroma of confession hedged with insurance. And you disclosed its existence? To no one, he said, as if oath tasted good. In my trade, you learn to keep secrets that smell like mold. I had my notebook steady and my eyes on their hands. Mira's were still. Viero's drummed, Kincaid's folded and unfolded like laundry, Dorsey's fluttered in parentheses. Wolfe took a sip of beer and set the glass down as if it had asked for clarity. Miss Morn's apartment was entered, he said, without crude force. A cavity in a floorboard knot was widened with warmed resin to lend verisimilitude to a scene. A crowbar was left to discourage thought. At 3 this afternoon, a portfolio was exchanged under the arch by 3 intermediaries. A half letter was delivered here with a note desiring keys. Have any of you ever used contact cement? Mira's mouth kicked at a corner. Once, in moot court, metaphorically. Viero snorted. It's faster than epoxy and less brittle than cyanoacrylates, he said. I fix my kids' skate gear with it. So what? Kincaid blinked. The exhibit cases in our community center use it to keep labels from curling. Dorsey lit up. Conservation recipes are full of pine resins, he said. Not contact cement, mind you. Pitch is a different animal, but I have a colleague who swears by an amber brew for rehousing pamphlets. Everyone is intimate with adhesives, Wolfe said dryly. How progressive. He rotated a finger. Keys? Who has access to Miss Morn's apartment? Board office has a set, Mira said. For emergency checks when she's traveling. That means me and Norman. Kincaid nodded miserably. They're in a lockbox. I haven't touched them since January. Viero? He shook his head. I don't hold client keys. Professor? Good heavens, no. I have enough to misplace. And Lucy Brand? Wolfe asked, and a silence noticed itself. Mira's eyebrows frowned. Lucy's a journalist. Sometimes she volunteers. Mostly she peers. She knows things by intuition I wish she didn't. She sniffed out a quarrel in April when I called Althea a romantic to her face. I told Lucy nothing. She arrives at 9, Wolfe said, without the benefit of your company. I prefer my irritants in sequence, not chorus. He leaned back. Now, there is a theatre-goer in this mess. He or she constructs, scene by scene, what Miss Morn is to feel. Goad, frighten, herd. The arch routine was intended to demonstrate reach and control while obscuring agency. Someone wants us discussing caps and strollers. Viero bristled. You want a picture of a face? Get me a budget. You will be useful otherwise, Wolfe said. You know 10th Avenue contractors. You will provide Archie with names and schedules for any Carradine-adjacent foremen between Houston and 59th who have begun wearing better shoes. Archie will gift them his personality. Kincaid clutched the tote. Mr. Wolfe, he said, this is awful and necessary, but Althea's reputation, if that letter appears piecemeal and out of context, our donors, our clients. Pfui, Wolfe said not unkindly. Your clients are poor. They do not donate illusions. Your donors pretend they purchase cleanliness. They cannot abide a smudge that tells a story. Miss Morn's father's turpitude will be a cudgel unless it becomes a premise. We will decide who swings it. The doorbell rang again. I rose. Mira's head tilted toward the hall like a hound that has learned Latin. I opened to Lucy Brand's eyebrows and the rest of her following. She wore a raincoat without rain, hair tucked like a secret, and an expression that built rapport out of curiosity and audacity in equal parts. "Ms. Brand," I said, "your 9 o'clock is early." "I start being late tomorrow," she said, sliding by with a smile that requested forgiveness only to frame the refusal. "Hello, Miss Belen, Professor, Norman, Saul." She dipped her head at Wolfe. "Mr. Wolfe, it's an honor to meet your chair." "My chair is busy," Wolfe said. "You will sit." He gestured to the remaining place, the one that squeaks when a witness forgets to lie efficiently. It squeaked, loyal to tradition. Lucy folded her hands. "I'm here because Althea won't let me be there," she said. "I'd like to protect her from her own spine and get a story. I didn't take her letter, but I can list 3 people who'd like to borrow it." "Restraint," Wolfe murmured. "We may reach your list without your help and be spared your tone. You overheard an argument in April." "She and Mira," Lucy said cheerfully. "You said ethics without outcomes is theatre. She said outcomes purchased with rot is bribery. You both had a point. You both still do." Meanwhile, Caradine continues to be affable on billboards. "Your whereabouts last night?" "A panel in Queens on tenant-press relations. I asked a councilman why his landlord owns his silence. Twitter can confirm the blood loss. I left at 9:30, went home, and edited until 2. I live alone. I also sleep with my phone. It can testify to the panel because it streamed half of it with bad sound." Viero grunted. "She likes hearing herself." "She likes hearing," Lucy said, unoffended, "especially what isn't meant for her." Wolfe breathed, which is an act of composition when he does it. "You will all understand this," he said. "I will not protect Miss Morn's illusions. I will protect her endeavor if it aligns with my appetite for order. Someone has trespassed in my house by proxy and in hers by audacity. I will answer in my fashion. Archie, you will accompany Ms. Brand to her office now. You will examine her notes and devices touching Ms. Morn for any hint of an approach from Caradine men or their covers. Miss Brand, you will allow this with equanimity." Lucy's eyes brightened. "If I refuse?" "You will waste my time," Wolfe said, "and I will not let you in my house again. Choose." She stood. "I adore clear instructions." "To me. Come along, Mr. Goodwin. I'll even let you buy a coffee I won't drink." Mira rose too. "Before you go," she said to Wolfe, "is Althea safe?" "No one is safe," he said. "You may inform her that I prefer her to be inconveniently stubborn rather than conveniently frightened. She is to stay put, accept no packages, answer no calls whose origin she cannot certify, and trust no reassurance. That includes yours." Mira's mouth thinned, but she nodded. Kincaid gathered his tote. Dorsey patted his scarf as if it would offer references. Viero paused at the door. "If this is theatre," he told me, "then someone's buying tickets for the balcony. They think they can see everything from up there." "Sometimes," I said, "the balcony is where the railing breaks." When the hall cleared, I ducked back into the office for my coat and a nod. Wolfe's eyes were shut, not for sleep, for assembling. I looked at his desk by habit. The half-letter lay where he'd left it, lower edge aligned with the blotter's seam. The vial sat to its left. Something else did not sit. Wolfe's small pietà of agate used as a paperweight had shifted 2 inches toward the edge. "Fritz," I called, "did you move this?" From the door he blinked at the desk, offended by the idea. "No, Archie." Wolfe's eyes opened. They went to the agate, to the door, to me. "Subtle," he said, "and stupid. Someone touched your desk." "While we were debating adhesives," he said. "Take Miss Brand. Return with her devices and her vanity. Lock the door behind you." I did as told, and as the latch clicked, I decided that whoever had nudged the agate had less interest in paperweights than in proving they could reach across a river and ruffle the water without getting wet. If they wanted theatre, they had just heard the orchestra tune up. Lucy's office was a rectangle of intent above a deli that specialized in arguments with mustard. She keyed us in and waved at a desk arranged like a chessboard. Laptop centered, 2 phones flanking, a reporter's notebook open to scrawl that would have done credit to a doctor with a grudge. I told her to sit where I could see her hands and to unlock everything with the enthusiasm of a citizen audit. She obeyed agreeably, offering the running commentary of the professionally curious. "Emails first," I said. "Search terms. Caradine, Althea, Morn, Permit, Variance, Holt, Resin, Arch." She typed without cheating on the spellings. The screen filled with names and dates. I read over her shoulder, a position that never flatters either party. A week-old thread wore the subject line, "Quiet Coffee," and came from a PR account at Caradine Realty Development. The sender signed himself Dan Pruitt, Director of Community Affairs, which is what you call public relations when you want it to pass dress code in court. He requested a background meet on our shared interest in tenant outcomes, a phrase that tastes like burnt sugar. Lucy had replied with a 4-word valentine, on the record only. The thread went quiet. "Pruitt ever try again?" I asked. "Yesterday," she said, and surfaced a missed call from a midtown exchange in a voicemail that had decided it was bashful. She tapped it open. Static and carousel music leaked through, the kind that rides speakers in parks even when nobody is listening. Then a man's baritone, "Ms. Brand, it's Dan Pruitt. No agenda, just coffee. I have questions about your friend's non-profit and rumor of a conflict. Call me." The timestamp put it at 3:42 p.m., 12 minutes after the portfolio played musical benches at the Arch. "I didn't pick up," she said. "I was watching a recording of myself offend a councilman." "Save that message and forward it," I told her. She did. Nudged the search. The word resin snagged a note from 3 days ago about conservation supplies. A friend at a gallery had emailed, "Your glue guy says the pitch is cleaner if you warm it with a gun, not a flame." Lucy had answered with a thumbs-up emoji and a "for my zine binding." She gave me the look that anticipates the question. "I actually bind a zine," she said. "It's about laundromat bulletin boards. Don't make that face." "A glue guy," I said. "Name?" "Malloy Props and Conservation," she said. 49th near 8th. They supply museums and theaters and anyone who needs a halo glued back on at speed. I filed it next to 48th's print and ship in the cabinet of coincidence that Wolfe hates. We opened her signal and found an unknown contact labeled Palimp. I raised a brow. She sighed and opened the chat. The messages were one-sided. "Ask your director about 9th and Bleecker, 2008. Ask the professor who taught her the word palimpsest. Keys open more than doors." The last line came last night. "The wood remembers." No response from Lucy. Timestamps, midnight 7 a.m. and 9:30 p.m. I looked at her. She shrugged. "Anonymous source," she said. "Mostly they send riddles. I don't respond until they cough proof." "Proof would be their name and a home address," I said, but copied the chat to my notes. The professor line rattled a shelf. Dorsey had used palimpsest in his lecture last month. Lucy had live-tweeted it with commentary too kind for academia. She saw me remembering and lifted her hands. "I admire his footnotes," she said. "I don't admire thieves." Her photos held a surprise that would have earned applause in cheaper theater. A day-old sequence tracked Sol Viero, leaning on a chain link at dusk, speaking through it to a man in a hard hat. The captions were thoughtful. "Viero chats with N. Frayne, foreman, Delancey Refurb. Frayne's permits tied to Caradine subsidiary." A second frame showed hands exchanging a slip of paper. The last caught Viero watching her with the flat calm of a man who keeps more than one pocket. I didn't like it, but disliking isn't evidence. "Why didn't you run this?" I asked. "Because forming a sentence takes time," she said. "Also because I'd like to keep breathing around Viero." He loses patience in nouns. I packed her laptop and both phones, slid them into my bag with the confidence of a man who knows he's not going to drop them, and we headed down. On the sidewalk, the Delhi air fought the evening, and an unremarkable sedan across the street failed at acting like it had always parked there. I told Lucy to turn right and not look back. She obeyed with enough discipline to make me consider forgiving journalists. At the corner, I phoned Saul Panzer and gave him the plate. He grunted acceptance and named a block where he would collect the tail by the nostrils. We walked another 2 blocks, turned twice, and Lucy said, "You don't even ask if I mind you borrowing my life." "You mind," I said. "You also came because being useful is a religion. Your tithe is privacy." She thought about it. "If Pruitt sent that coffee invitation after your little parade under the arch, then he either watched the show or got the program notes," I said. "Wolfe will ring him in due time. First I want Malloy." We grabbed a cab and told it to drift toward 8th. Malloy Props and Conservation occupied a long room behind a storefront that had retired from theater posters and given itself to shipwrights of paper. The air smelled like fresh-cut boards and ambitions that needed clamps. A man with a shaved head and careful hands looked up from a table where a small plaster column lay on gauze like a grandee on a sickbed. "Malloy," he said. "Buying, selling, or confessing?" "Browsing," I said, and laid the squeeze bottle on the counter. "Recognize the brand?" He took it, sniffed, tipped a drop onto a card, spread it with a spatula. He frowned at the behavior. "House mix," he said. "You can buy it lots of places. You come here for this sheen." He eyed me. "Who are you?" "Goodwin," I said. "What's in the house?" "Rubber and hexane if I'm cheap, naphtha if I'm fancy. A little rosine to keep it honest. I do a pine pitch for lining cavities and fake not aging. That smells like summer prisons." He reached under the counter and produced a tiny vial that matched ours, like brothers who had chosen different hats. "Sold 3 of these yesterday. 2 to a set designer who needed to swear a beam was older than it is. 1 to a young man with rimless glasses who asked too many questions about temperature." "Name?" "Cash customer," he said. "People who ask about temperature don't enjoy receipts." "Describe." "Mid-30s, barber neat, suit that had a gym membership. He wanted the needle bottle too." He tapped ours. "Said he was binding zines." Lucy coughed delicately. "It's a noble craft," she said. "Did he have a cap?" "No. He had a look that wanted one," Malloy said, "like a man who practiced being nobody and hadn't gotten the accent yet." I left a card and enough praise for his vials to register. Back on the sidewalk, Lucy said, "That could be anyone with eyebrows." "It's better than nobody," I said. Saul texted, "Sedan lost, picked up by a man who apologized to it." I told him to meet me at the brownstone and brought Lucy home to Wolfe like a borrowed violin I intended to return with strings. Inside, the office had that charged quiet that means Wolfe has used his time to put pieces in pens. He pointed at a tray where Fritz had staged 3 items: a small brass key that wasn't Althea's, a visiting card from Dan Pruitt, and a second note typed in the same contempt for signatures as the first. Fritz reported he'd found the key on the office rug after the guests left. It had not been there when he vacuumed at 7. The card had arrived by messenger at 8:15 with the note, "Ms. Morn's allies multiply. Mistakes do too. 3 p.m. was proof. Tomorrow at noon, bring what is owed." Wolfe's mouth tightened in that micro-grimace he produces for overcooked lamb and amateurs with budgets. He held up the key with tongs, inspected the cuts, and set it on felt. "Not her apartment," he said. "A file cabinet, or a locker, or a mailbox." I gave him Malloy, Pruitt's voicemail, Palimp's riddles, and the photos of Viero. He closed his eyes for a count I know, 6, to sort the wheat from the glue. When he opened them, the grey had sharpened. "Pruitt wants credit for what he did not do," he said. he will be indulged and punished. The theatre-goer bought resin and a bottle on 49th. He left a key here to remind me he can touch my desk and to make us hunt the wrong lock. He has an appetite for control and for instructing clever women to bring him keys. Furry. Lucy leaned forward. Who is he? A man who prefers choreography to risk, Wolfe said, which narrows our circle only to every petty tyrant with a diploma. Then where next? Next, he said. Archie will return Miss Brand to her office, keep her devices, and then go with Mr. Panzer to visit Mr. Pruitt's conscience. I will invite Miss Morn to dine at 7 with Miss Beelan and Mr. Kincaid, absent Mr. Vero and Professor Dorsey, who will be otherwise engaged by my design. We will remove performers from their audience and watch who forgets their lines. He lifted the brass key again, let it glint, and dropped it into a dish. And we will decide which lock this bauble unlocks before its owner tells us. Saul was waiting in the vestibule, wearing the look he saves for people who think they've finished hiding. I passed him Lucy's devices and the plate number and gave him the abridged version. He nodded once, and we went hunting Pruitt's conscience at Carradine's headquarters, a glass trapezoid that had decided steel and light could make it respectable. The lobby had 2 guards and a bouquet that could have posted bail. Saul handled reception because he looks like somebody's accountant until you tell him no. He didn't get no. We were shown to a lounge designed to reduce voices to velvet, and 5 minutes later, Dan Pruitt slid in, hand extended, smile tuned to brother-in-law you don't like but can't avoid. Mr. Goodwin, he said, then recognized Saul with a tic that ruined the smile's alibi. Mr. Panzer, we've read about you both, in different sections. I want the section on community affairs, I said. Specifically, your call to Miss Brand at 3:42. That's when your friends were rehearsing under an arch. He lifted both hands. Surrender without conviction. I called because the rumor mill says Miss Morn's non-profit is compromised by a family matter and because we want constructive dialogue. You called because you wanted a line of credit in case the play flops, I told him. Who told you about the family matter? He gave me the sad puppy look they teach in seminar. It's not a state secret that Miss Morn's father worked for the city. The rest is gossip. I'd rather talk about outcomes. Our firm is investing in mixed-income housing that... Saul interrupted with a kindness that could sprain your neck. Your mixed-income ratios collapse if you move the decimal. Who's your glue guy, Pruitt? Glue, Pruitt repeated, baffled in italics. For theater, Saul said. For props. For staging a knot that isn't a knot. You hired a composition major to play director. You want plausibility consultation. Pay me now and save yourself the embarrassment. Pruitt's smile hardened. Mr. Panzer, if you're here to make threats, I'll summon counsel. You just did, Saul said, and handed him one of my cards to keep the rhythm. We'll be back with a question you can answer without a script. On the sidewalk, Saul reported the expression Pruitt had tried to suppress at glue. Not ignorance, recognition. The worst kind, because it comes with a budget. He's not our composer, Saul said. He's the man who thinks a composer improves client management. Wolfe thinks he wants credit, I said. Let's teach him what it costs. We swung by Malloy again to see if the rimless glasses had returned for an encore. They hadn't. Malloy offered to call if they did, in a tone that suggested he'd prefer clientele who bought halos rather than fate. I phoned Wolfe from the curb. He said dinner at 7 was confirmed for Althea, Mira, and Kincaid. Professor Dorsey had been dispatched to Columbia to fetch a librarian at 8. Viero had been bribed by Truth to stake out a warehouse on 10th where shoes upgrade themselves. The brass key, Wolfe said, is almost certainly to a postal box. Your route home passes 3 stations. Exercise your charm. Charm persuaded 2 clerks to let me glance at racks. The third, at a grimy annex on Bleecker, required a stamp purchase and a memory exercise. A brass blank cut like ours matched the boxes installed in 06, tinny doors with tiny egos. I tested the key in 2 empties for fit. The cut sang the way a lock does when it has found its parts. The clerk coughed his policies at me, but Saul distracted him by asking to exchange a money order for exact coins, a request difficult enough to melt doctrine. The key slid, turned, stopped. Right family, wrong door. It was enough to file under probable. I returned to the brownstone with the smell of lobby disinfectant riding me and found Wolfe composed, which is not unusual, and the brass key now lives in a small dish of his choosing, which is. Fritz had laid a broiled trout that had never annoyed anyone, and we gave it a fair hearing. At 7, the bell rang twice in quick succession, the dialect of women who agree to be late only in private. I ushered Althea and Mira in and put Kincaid on their flank. Wolfe didn't bother with pleasantries. He discouraged them with the beer glass. "You are safe," he told Althea, "only to the extent that you are predictable to no one. Tonight you will be inconvenient." "Inconvenience," she said evenly, "is my rate." He laid out the arch, the half-letter, the resin, and the key, while I watched their eyes get used to the arrangement. Mira's face hardened at Pruitt. Kincaid sagged when I said mailbox. Althea listened like a violin. "Your enemies," Wolfe said, "desire posture more than possession. They could have printed facsimiles, leaked, spun. Instead, they ration. They need you to feel handled. They need your keys for no purpose but ritual. I will deny them their right." She nodded once. "What do you want me to do tonight?" "Eat," he said, "then answer questions precisely. You will tell me, without hesitation, the name your father wrote." She glanced at Mira, then at me, and found the chair that does not squeak. "It was Stephen Holt who gave my father money," she said, voice steady. "But the letter says my father took it on instruction from a second man. As instructed by, and the name is," she swallowed once, "Lionel Dorsey." Kincaid flinched so broadly his tie sighed. Mira's glance would have put a gavel through a desk. I kept my face on the long side of neutral. Wolfe's eyelids dropped, rose. "Professor Dorsey," he said, "would have been a youth. A 20-something adjunct who volunteered on a tenant case," Althea said. "My father respected his history vocabulary and ignored his lack of it in ethics. I didn't tell you because I wanted to be wrong." "You wanted time," Wolfe said. "You will have less. Archie, telephone Mr. Dorsey and summon him at 10. Tell him I've obtained a fragment of a letter that impugns a dear colleague and that I desire his expertise on paper. Do not mention names. Then, Ms. Morn, Miss Bellin, Mr. Kincaid, listen." He leaned forward, and the room did too. "Our composer left a key. We believe it fits a postal box. Tomorrow at 11, Archie will open it with Mr. Panzer while I sit here and decline an ulcer. If there is bait inside, we will take it and set a hook." Mira's mouth twitched. "And if there's a camera?" "There will be at least 2, Wolfe said, not without satisfaction. "I've arranged something that will complicate their angle." We ate the trout as if justice relied on protein, and when Fritz brought coffee, Wolfe announced that Miss Brand had surrendered her toys and her temperament and gone home under instructions to keep her head away from windows. At 9:45, Dorsey phoned from the street, breathless apology on the wire for his delay, and I let him in. He took the stairs 2 at a time in a scarf that had found new maps. When he saw Althea, he lit up with sympathy. When he saw Mira, he dialed it back to deference. When he saw Wolfe, he produced reverence dressed as curiosity. He did not see the brass key on the dish. That was for me. "Professor," Wolfe said, cool as the plate under a custard, "we have a fragment that troubles me. I will show you the lower half only." Dorsey took the sheet with the careful fingers he used on old pamphlets. He went pale on schedule at the signature. Then his eyes went to the cut, the watermark, the speckling where iron gall had flirted with the fibers. He nodded. "Authentic," he said softly. "Even in halves, the line sings true." "Read the line above the money," Wolfe said. Dorsey obeyed. Yes, 5,000. His voice faltered, then tried to recover and failed. His throat worked. My God. Your God is not required, Wolfe said. Your candor is. He let it hang, then, the upper half names you. Dorsey's eyes flared and then narrowed, like a camera door in a storm. That's impossible, he said. Mr. Wolfe, I was a graduate student then. I barely had rent. I volunteered. I wrote grants. I licked envelopes. I admired Mr. Morn because he was courteous to interns. If someone has forged, spare me, Wolfe said. Forgery requires motive, access, skill, and a composer with a different palette. The current one lacks courage for real affronts. He pastiches. He does not invent. The letter is true. The sentence about you may be true, false or partially false in a way that pleases cowards. The question is, whom did you anger enough to frame you with accuracy? Dorsey sank into the squeak chair and let it complain. Sweat found his lip. I led a protest this spring, he said. At a panel on ethical redevelopment. Carradine's counsel, Mr. Holt, was there by video. I called him a creditor of misery. He swallowed. And 3 months ago, I wrote an op-ed accusing the Department of Buildings of laundering favors. They resent adjectives. Who doesn't? I said. What about Pruitt? Pruitt is a lunch calendar in a suit, Dorsey said, with an academic's contempt for men who network. He collects relationships and hands out gloss. Wolfe closed his eyes and returned. Enough. Professor, you will go home the long way, use streets without arches, and speak to no one. Miss Morn, you will stay in our spare room under Fritz's custody in my disfavor. Mr. Kincaid, you will sleep and, upon waking, you will compose a donor letter that says nothing and means fortitude. Ms. Beelan, you will warn your co-counsel to expect a weather change. Archie, postal box at 11, I said. But first? First, he said, and his tone began arranging furniture. Call Mr. Pruitt at home, tell him I decline coffee, but will accept a confession. Offer him a seat here at 1:30. He will think himself brave. Then call Mr. Fierro and instruct him to watch the Bleecker Annex from 10:30 on. Not for us, for the man with rimless glasses. He will be early to watch us late. I phoned and left messages that sounded innocent if you had never met us. When the house settled and Fritz consigned Althea to a bed he had ironed into chastity, I did a last circuit. The agate remained obedient. The brass key glinted like a promise kept in the wrong pocket. Wolfe sat with eyes closed, lips pursed as if tasting a sauce for deceit. I took my own inventory and found sleep unlikely and duty certain, which is the usual ratio. As I passed the front room, the bell gave a discreet nip. I opened to a courier who had been told to be forgettable. He handed over a small padded envelope and a clipboard that wanted more names than I liked to give. The envelope addressed itself to Ms. Morn in typed anonymous. I carried it into the office on the rule. Anything that steps on our rug gets inspected. Wolfe raised a finger. I slit the edge with a knife that keeps a clean conscience. Inside lay another half-sheet, upper this time, trimmed as its brother had been, and a Polaroid that smelled faintly of impatience. The upper half displayed the rest of the sentence Althea had held back, as instructed by L. Dorsey. The photograph showed a row of post office boxes at the Bleecker Annex. The one in the center wore a small brass key in its mouth. The caption typed under it said, "Tomorrow noon, keys open more than doors." Wolfe did not sigh. He spoke one word, a verdict on the culinary arts and men who cheapen them. Gad. Morning didn't ask permission. Wolfe kept his 11-to-1 with the orchids in violet, which left me to juggle the mailbox ballet and the watchers. I phoned Panzer at 8 and Vieira at 8:05. Saul would take the interior perch, disguised as a man whose hobby is the classifieds. Vieira sulked about the assignment until I told him the annex had a coffee machine that lies about being coffee. Then he sulked with purpose. Althea ate Fritz's oatmeal like it had done something to her and thanked him with a smile that made him forgive the oats. Wolfe instructed without opening his eyes. "Open the box at 11 precisely. If there is a device, remove it. If there is paper, read only enough to know where to burn it. If there is bait, bait back." At 10:30, I strolled into the Bleecker Annex with a magazine I didn't intend to read and the brass key in my pocket like a coin with opinions. The place hummed its small, stale song. 10 boxes down from a poster that promised passports soon, Saul sat with his paper held high and his reflection obedient in the brass. Viero leaned at a counter, pretending the clerk's mood fascinated him. I took a loop, checked exits, clocked 2 civilians who weren't. One was a cap with a neat brim that had learned humility. The other wore rimless glasses and a navy overcoat that wanted to be invisible. His shoes had made new friends. He watched nothing in particular with the attention of a man who has rehearsed how to ignore. At 11, the clock on the wall remembered its job. I slid the key into a box I'd already met in a photograph. The lock turned like it had been waiting to judge me. Inside sat a burner phone and a thumb drive on a string, plus a half-sheet with the economy we'd come to know. Noon. The phone wore a peel-off sticker with a number written in tidy hand, and its battery icon said it had slept well. I looked down the row without moving my head. Rimless didn't blink. Cap examined his cuticles as if they had applied for a visa. I palmed the phone and drive into an envelope I'd brought along like a magician who admits the trick early, then slid in a twin burner I'd purchased on the way. Same model, same tired casing, battery charged, my number in it. The note I returned with an addition in pencil. Received. When the door clicked, I heard the sound a mouse makes in a trap that hasn't sprung yet. Air moving wrong. Rimless shifted his weight. Cap studied his sleeve. I drifted to a table. Saul didn't look at me. He folded his paper and admired a crossword. Viero yawned the way a cat threatens. At 11:07, a man in a parka did nothing, which was impressive. At 11:13, the phone in my pocket buzzed with impatience. I let it, then killed it, then slipped out to the sidewalk and dialed home. Fritz put me through to Wolfe between a basal admonition and a thermometer reading. "Phone and drive in hand," I said. "Rimless present, cap as well. Noon is the ring." "You will not answer," Wolfe said. "You will allow it to ring until our composer decides he prefers agency to patience. If he approaches the box, let Mr. Viero regard his shoe dust. If he does not, bring me the toys immediately after 12. At 11:57, I took a position where the annex clock and my watch could disagree amiably. At noon, the faint burr of a ringtone sounded from inside the box row. That would be the twin I'd left. Rimless's head tilted 10 degrees. He didn't move. 30 seconds. 1 minute. The burr stopped. 2 minutes later, Cap peeled from a wall and ambled to the boxes with the casual stride of a tourist in a museum of numbers. He used a key on a box 2 down from ours, took out nothing, put in nothing, and left with an expression that meant he had done enough for his day's invoice. Rimless moved last, not to our box, but to the door, where he took a breath of outdoor air like a man who had disliked it indoors. He departed without luggage. Panic and discipline had a handshake and chose the latter. I texted Saul to hold the fort, Viero to follow Cap if he moved with purpose. Viero grunted affirmative and slouched out 3 beats later with a grace that belonged to other species. I headed for the brownstone with the envelope around our new friends and the feeling that nobody had gotten what they wanted, and someone was pleased about that. Back in the office, Wolfe accepted the burner with tongs and eyed it as if it might offer an apology. He nodded at the thumb drive. "Archie." I used a laptop that never meets the internet without a chaperone and opened the drive. Inside were 3 folders: letter, context, and POR. Letter held scans of the full page we now had in halves, no surprise, and metadata that claimed the scan had been created yesterday morning by a user named L. Dorsey. Context contained a timeline PDF titled More Network, with arrows from Althea to Mira to Kincaid to Dorsey to Press Brand and back to CRD Pruitt. The arrows labeled with verbs like leverage and expose, in a font that wanted a life in tech decks. PR contained a draft release on Caradine letterhead. Caradine affirms ethical standards amid non-profit turmoil, with blank quotes waiting for Mr. Pruitt's conscience. Also, a media list. I read the names aloud. Wolfe's lips pressed thinner than the paper. Childish, he said, and useful. He pointed at the metadata. Lie number 1. Mr. Dorsey is not a man who labels his sins. The composer wishes him to be our culprit and lacks imagination sufficient to counterfeit a duller signature. Lie number 2, the arrows speak the language of men who mistake diagrams for understanding. Mr. Pruitt's department authored this file, or commissioned it. He will mule that it came from elsewhere. He will also try to buy my forbearance. Pfui. He flicked a glance at the phone. Call the number on that sticker from our line, then let it ring twice and hang up. I did. The burner chirped twice on the desk. I cut the line. 10 seconds later, the office line trilled with the tone we reserve for strangers. I let it dance to the 3rd ring and picked up. A voice altered by something cheap said, "You took what is not yours." I'm sentimental, I said. Sue me. You tamper again. Ms. Morn's reputation dissolves in an hour, the voice said. Bring keys. Noon tomorrow becomes today at 4. Your schedule is ambitious, I said. Try 2. Caradine headquarters lobby. I'll bring a violin. A click answered. Wolfe's eyebrows made a remark. He didn't say it. He wishes the theatre back, he said. We will deny him the lobby and give him a pen. At 1:28, Pruitt arrived in a suit that wanted to testify. He smiled for the room and frowned at the brass key. Wolfe did not ask him to sit. He told him to. Pruitt sat. I put the burner and the thumb drive on the edge of the desk in a line he could see but not reach. Mr. Pruitt, Wolfe said, you are the unfortunate middleman for a bungler with tastes above his courage. You proposed coffee to Miss Brand at 3:42 yesterday, 12 minutes after a childish pageant at the Arch. Today, you, or someone you pay, placed a document on a drive that attempts to make Professor Dorsey the author of his own ruin and coupled it with a press release you intend to disgorge at the moment of most nuisance. Your purpose is not exoneration. It is leverage. You may begin with denial. I prefer brevity. Pruitt went through the catalogue, indignation, surprise, woundedness, with a competence that would have gotten him a B in a class I wouldn't take. Mr. Wolfe, he said, if someone is manipulating Ms. Morn, we want to help. Caradine has always operated above board. We've invested millions in communities ignored by... Communities, Wolfe said, are not improved by strokes of your pen. You will tell me who your consultant is for reputation architecture, or I will feed this drive to a reporter who reads for a living. She is irritant enough to enjoy it and has a mouth you do not buy. Pruitt hesitated, glanced at me, then at the drive, and then at the part of the room where the ceiling meets the wall. That's where liars look when they decide to save themselves by betraying a colleague they don't like. We retain a firm on crisis narrative, he said carefully. They coach us on proactive communication. The principal is Lyle Doran. Spell, Wolfe said. Dorin, Pruitt said. He's independent now, used to be with a political shop. He's good at diagrams. He thinks in flows. He doesn't break into apartments. He does advise on optics. Rimless glasses, I asked. Pruitt blinked. Yes, he said, before remembering not to. He calls them non-frames. Saul texted, Cape took a bus uptown, now on foot, heading 49th. I forwarded it to my brains folder labeled glue. Mr. Pruitt, Wolfe said, you will send Mr. Doran to me at 5. You will tell him I'm bored with his theatre and intend to cancel his run. You will also instruct your legal counsel to examine the phrase constructive extortion this afternoon with attention to modifiers. Do it now." Pruitt stood too quickly and steadied himself with a hand on the chair that squeaked its resentment. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, and found nothing fit to add. He left his card on the desk like an apology and took the elevator down to the world that had formed him. When the door closed, Wolfe exhaled a measure of disdain. "L. Doran," he said, "close enough to L. Dorsey to satisfy a theatrical mind. A sorry jest. The initial was Bait. The name placed on the scan is Bait. Our composer is a man who abbreviates people to fit boxes." "Doran made the diagram," I said. "Who cut the floor and left a crowbar?" "Doran would hire hands and provide instructions," Wolfe said. "He would shop for resin and not know why it smelled like sawdust memories. He would insist on keys because symbols please him. He would, above all, stand close enough to admire his work and far enough to disclaim it. We will shorten his leash." Saul came at 2:15, pocketed the burner, and showed me a photo of Cap talking to a storefront on 49th with a sign that read, "Doran Strategic." The office was 2 doors from Malloy. Sometimes the city saves you cab fare to your enemy. Saul's next frame had rimless arriving by reflection in a plate glass door. He hadn't smiled in the photo. He had composed. 5 o'clock, Wolfe said. "We will receive Mr. Doran. Before that, Archie, you will visit Malloy once more and ask whether the man with rimless glasses has an account for prop rentals, not purchases. A rental leaves a longer tail." I grabbed my hat. On the way out, the office phone gave a polite cough. I took it. A voice without disguise said, "Mr. Goodwin, this is Professor Dorsey. I think someone followed me home last night. They left a paper under my door. It says, 'History repeats when instructed.' What should I do?" "Stay put," I told him, "and stop reading notes without gloves. We're about to ask your admirer to pronounce his initials in full." Malloy looked up from a saint missing 2 fingers and gave me the resigned nod of a man who knows trouble returns because it likes the lighting. I didn't bother with foreplay. "Rentals," I said, "not purchases. Heat guns, needle bottles, prop crowbars, anything you'd put in a tote for a client who wants to stage age." He ran a ledger that belonged in a museum for honest and glanced from the screen to my face to decide how much discretion would cost. I slid a card and the kind of smile that pays a small bill. "2 accounts yesterday," he said. "One I know. Set designer at the Palladium, has a season pass. The other is a new walk-in with a temp card. Rented a heat gun, a small needle-tip bottle, and a Victorian pry bar. That's theatre for crowbar. Returned the gun this morning, paid cash. Name on the temp. Lyle D., he said. We only require 2 initials when the card is temporary, and he was eager to be temporary. Rimless glasses, hair like he's late for a meeting, overcoat that doesn't know it's new, with a man in a cap who did the carrying and the not talking. Let me guess, I said. The cap had a chin that looks like a policy and a watch that thinks it's a boss. Now you're showing off, Malloy said. He printed a rental slip with the personal data blacked and the items visible. I trust the law's invited but eating in the kitchen. The law's on a diet, I said, and left, wondering if Doran would arrive at Wolfe's den at 5 with his rimless polished for compliments. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe stock still exactly the way he likes to be when he's winding a watch with his brain. I put the rental slip down, gave him Malloy's lip and the cap's confirmation, and had the pleasure of seeing the corner of his mouth nudge, in contempt's direction. Of course he rented a prop bar, he said. He cannot resist a label. He would rather be accused of theatre than theft. He believes one absolves the other. At 4:30, Pruitt phoned to say Doran would present himself at 5 with a cooperative attitude. Wolfe made a sound that said cooperation is merely the prelude to a lie. Althea had spent the afternoon in our spare room working through her version of Waiting. Mira came at 4:45 because time obeys her, and Kincaid called to ask whether he should cancel a donor breakfast. Wolfe told him he might need the calories. Saul arrived with the burner phone's log. It had received only 3 calls, all from a number that bounced off a VoIP service, living rent-free and nowhere. Viero sent a text from 49th. Cap and rimless. Met, no boxes. Entered Doran's office. Left separately, Cap east, rimless west. The bell rang at 5 to the dot. I brought Doran in and introduced him to the chair that squeaks for the vein. He wore non-frames you could shave with, a tie that had opinions, and the posture of a man who has been told to sit often, by courts. He smiled at me as if my name were a demographic. Mr. Goodwin, Mr. Wolfe, I'm grateful for the opportunity to address misconceptions. You will be more grateful when we correct them, Wolfe said. Sit. Doran sat and violated the chair by making it hold his self-regard. He took in the resin vial, the half-letter, the brass key, the thumb drive I had left visible, and arranged his face to deny each in turn. We advise clients on narrative, he began. We do not create facts, we order them. You rent theatre, Wolfe said, to arrange facts in tableau. You warmed resin to widen a knot cavity, left a crowbar, staged a portfolio relay, and took a photograph of a post office box you hoped would make clever people behave stupidly. You placed a scan on a drive and labeled the creator Il Dorsey, an infantile ploy that mistakes initials for identity. You then called a burner and gave orders in an anonymous tenor. You did this to make Ms. Morn regard you as inevitable. Pfui. Doran lifted one shoulder, the half shrug that says we're all adults here. What you describe, he said, are hypotheticals. If such hypotheticals happened, they would have been executed by vendors whose names I don't know, paid by entities who are not clients, in the interest of aligning a harmful narrative with reality. Ms. Morn's non-profit is vulnerable to a charge that will surface regardless. Our objective would be to ensure the public understands whose failure it was originally. Spare me professional scripture, Wolfe said. You wore a cap. Doran blinked. I never wear hats, he said, offended in his accessories. And if a cap appeared at a post office, it did, I said. He uses a bus when he wants to feel municipal. Doran's non-frames reflected me, in miniature. You have conclusions, he said. What you lack is the thing you think you possess, the letter. You do not have the letter. If Ms. Morn's organization wishes to avoid a public autopsy of its ethics, she will confess the letter, confess her father, and recuse herself from the suit. That is the only path that preserves any. Wolfe lifted a finger. It may be the most interrupting finger in America. Your client, he said, is not Mr. Carradine. Your client is his counsel, Mr. Holt. He is the man who prefers instruments he can deny. You were hired to ruin Miss Morn's appetite for boldness and for more. You erred by including a joke at the expense of Professor Dorsey. You thought the substitution of Doran for Dorsey in metadata a clever echo. It is, in fact, your confession. Doran smiled finally and revealed clean, small teeth. I admire the myth, he said softly. You sit, you see. You pronounce. But your pronouncements don't bind me. If you had law, you'd have used it already. If you had the letter, you'd have shown it to me to savor my face. He cocked his head. So you don't. You have halves and performances. And I, hypothetically, have the whole. Not for long, Wolfe said as blandly as mashed potatoes. Archie. I set the rental slip on the desk so Doran could read the initials he had pretended were adequate. Then I placed Malloy's vial beside our vial and the photograph of the mailbox with the key in its smile. Your flaw, I told him, is that you outsource without understanding the hands you pay. The cap was tidy. He left a bottle where we could find it because he wants a raise. He'll take it in cash or in code, but he'll take it. When he does, he'll tell us where the letter sleeps for the hour it isn't useful in your pocket. Doran held still. which is not easy when your livelihood is momentum. You can't pull the thread if you don't know which sweater, he said. Also, Mr. Wolfe, whatever you imagine Mr. Holt instructed, you can't possibly prove. That is for later, Wolfe said. For now, you will attend in this room at 8 this evening with Mr. Pruitt, Mr. Holt, if he has the courage, Mr. Viero, Professor Dorsey, Miss Brand, Miss Bellin, Mr. Kincaid, and Miss Morn. You will bring the letter. Doran laughed. It wasn't his best work. Mr. Wolfe, you can't convene my calendar. I can, Wolfe said, because if you do not appear, I will send the drive and Lucy Brand to the part of the press that eats your kind with both hands. Moreover, I will forward the rental slip to the district attorney's elder assistant who hates cleverness, and the photograph to a judge who once sat through a season of your work and swore off theater. That arrangement will require you to enjoy your evenings elsewhere. I am offering comfort. Doran looked at Pruitt's card as if it had betrayed him from the walnut. He looked at me and found no purchase. He looked at Wolfe and found an edifice. 8, he said. And after that? After that, Wolfe said, you will have less to sell. Go. He went. The room took its breath back as if he had been a weight on the air. Wolfe closed his eyes and addressed the ceiling he never flatters. It is him, he said. But not only him. Someone in Miss Morn's circle whispered at the moment useful to Mr. Doran. That may be stupidity, fear, or grubby desire. We will choose later. Althea appeared at the doorway, pale with the pale that gets you through. If Dorsey isn't the one, she said evenly, then either Norman or Saul told someone something they shouldn't have. Or Lucy did. Everyone told someone, Wolfe said. What matters is who told the right person at the right time. Mr. Viero's evening to confess will be later than 8. I require him outside. Mr. Kincaid will bring his tote to remind himself he owns things that aren't pity. Miss Brand will bring her appetite. Miss Belin will bring her restraint. Professor Dorsey will bring his outrage. His eyes went to me. And you will bring the letter if you can. I prefer not to burgle unknown lockers between now and 7:30, I said. You won't. The cap will bring it, he said. He cannot resist improving his wage. It is 3 blocks from Doran's office to Malloy. Mr. Viero can convince him the change is necessary. Viero phoned at 6, voice carrying wind. Cap left Doran and went west. Stopped at a sandwich place, bought something that doesn't deserve it, then walked into a building with private mailboxes on the first floor. He took a manila from box 27B, went out, turned north. I'm behind, Saul's ahead. Your 8 o'clock is on track if nobody decides to be original. Originality, I said, is cancelled for tonight. By 7, the chairs were placed the way Wolfe likes suspects to discover they are characters. Fritz had produced sandwiches for those of us not on ethics. Mira and Althea arrived together with a quiet that suggested inventions of silence. Kincaid came with his tote and the expression of a man who can calculate loss in columns. Lucy arrived at 7:20 with a notebook and the kind of smile that has to earn its keep. Dorsey came at 7:30, shook in the hall, and settled into indignation with a teacher's economy. Pruitt, punctual because fear sets clocks, showed at 7:40 and sat where the line of sight forced him to consider mirrors. Doran came at 7:55 with a briefcase that believed itself unspectacular. At 7:58, the bell rang once more. I opened, and Viero handed me a manila envelope with the satisfaction of a man who had just persuaded Labour to renegotiate with management. He's not happy, Viero said. He also won't be a problem until next week. I took the envelope to Wolfe. It had the weight of paper that intends to finish what it started. Wolfe touched the flap like it might bite, then left it closed. He looked at the room as if he were reading an index and liking the cross-references. The hands of the clock found 8 together like conspirators. Good evening, Wolfe said. We have been manipulated, patronized and intruded upon. That ends now. Wolfe let the quiet sit long enough to make somebody offer it a chair. Then he tapped the manila with one forefinger, a summons. I slid my thumb under the gummed flap and opened it as if it might hold a grudge. Paper breathed. The sheet inside had the texture of something that remembers hands. It carried the browning that iron gall gives paper when it's learned more years than it asked for. I placed it on the blotter beside the lower half we'd been courting. Wolfe didn't reach. He looked. That's his version of fingerprints. "Archie," he said, "a line." I nested edges. Fibers made friends. Fold lines met their reflections like old men at a reunion. The top half belonged. It belonged the way a brick belongs to a wall. Wolfe's eyes traced the watermark's ghost. Its Mills medallion sat where a Mills medallion should. He inclined his head the small degree that counts for applause. "Mr. Doran," he said pleasantly, "your counterfeit was conscientious and still a counterfeit. Observe, all of you, the fold marks on this upper half coincide with the lower. The watermark's crown is whole. The earlier half-page, his, had the crown truncated and offset. Sloppy. Doran's Adam's apple forgot its cue. He kept still, but stillness changes color under pressure. Now, Wolfe went on, we attend to letters. Here in the genuine text we see the line Ms. Morn described. I received monies in the sum of 5,000 from Mr. Stephen Holt for the purpose of granting, without legal warrant, variance approvals to the project at 9th Avenue. That sentence concludes without a subordinate clause. There is no "as instructed by." Nothing. Mr. Doran added that, typed it on a different machine, note the misaligned S, and cut it to length to titillate fools. Pfui. Dorsey made a sound like a valve releasing. Mira's nostrils flared and then reined it in. Pruitt stared at the paper as if he'd never met a noun. Kincaid's hands folded and unfolded on his tote, like he was teaching them a morale. Lucy's pencil found a gallop. Doran produced a smile in the wrong key. "If you think I arranged any—" "Don't," Wolfe said, with enough ballast to stop freight. "Your rental slip is on my desk. Your photo of the mailbox is under it. Your initials on a temp account at a prop house, halfway between your office and your vendor's taxi. You employ a man in a cap who cannot resist making a souvenir of glue. The anonymous messages to Ms. Brand used a term, palimpsest, you picked up from Professor Dorsey's lecture, which she live-tweeted. You are not original, you are acquisitive." Doran turned his head a fraction toward Pruitt without letting his eyes move. "That's choreography for how much will you pay for my spine?" Pruitt's mouth worked and produced nothing fit to keep. Wolfe flicked a finger at the letter. "Miss Morn, you will look, not to recite your father's shame, we are past catechism, but to see that this page is what you found under your floor and were robbed of." She came without hesitating, leaned and breathed once through her nose as if she had just met an old wind. "This is it," she said. "The browning at the margin. The smudge where he tested the pen and then didn't use it. The crease at the corner. How did you—" "Mr. Viero persuaded a mule to lower its head," Wolfe said. "Our composer kept the letter sleeping in a private mailbox that strokes his sense of control. He wished to ration dread. It bored me." He looked over the room. "We will now apportion what happens next." Pruitt remembered his profession and tried for sincerity. "Mr. Wolfe, none of this reflects Carradine's values. If an outside consultant exceeded—" "Values," Wolfe murmured, "fit neatly in a brochure. Mr. Holt retained Mr. Doran, not your firm. Your function was to applaud. Mr. Holt originated the bribe, Mr. Morn confessed. Mr. Holt remains counsel to Carradine's empire and prefers to operate by intermediaries who can be discarded. He will be invited to experience permanence." He glanced at me. "Telephone him. Inform him that Miss Morn is present, that the letter is in my custody, and that a press representative sits in my office sharpening verbs. If he would like a chance to speak unrecorded, He may arrive in 15 minutes. Otherwise, his quotes will be blank. Pruitt paled the efficient way, from collar inward. Doran's jaw flexed a theory of crisis control that involved exits. I dialed and reached a gatekeeper who had swallowed glass for breakfast. Then Mr. Stephen Holt replaced her, cool and competent as a hypodermic. I delivered the gist with no garnish. He said, "I will be there," and hung up. He is a man who reserves adjectives for juries. Wolfe folded his hands on his midriff, which is what contemplation looks like from the front. "Now," he said, "we identify the whisperer." Someone in Miss Morn's circle breathed at the exact moment our composer needed air. "The list is short." Mira angled her chin. "You'll say Lucy?" Lucy shook her head, unoffended. "I like being first suspect. It means the story is interesting, but I didn't know the letter existed until April by accident. I didn't tell Doran. He messaged me riddles. I ignored them. If I wanted to be useful to him, I'd be less clever." Kincaid cleared his throat. "I have never spoken to anyone at Caradine. I answer phones from donors and from people who wish they were. That's my circle." "Mr. Vieira," Wolfe said, "has the vice of competence mixed with contempt. Men like that sometimes trade knowledge for convenience. He also brought me this envelope. He is outside by design. If I believed him the whisper, I would not trust him with my letter." He shifted his gaze to Dorsey. "Professor, you have enemies because you choose them and polish them, but hatred finds its object early. Mr. Doran's connection formed later. The first whisper came when Miss Morn and Miss Bellin debated in April. Miss Brand overheard. But a whisper let out of a room finds a destination only if a path was cleared. Mr. Kincaid. Kincaid's face crumpled, not into guilt, into hurt. "Mr. Wolfe, No. You printed the Grant calendar on a copier controlled by a management company contracted by Carradine's subsidiary," Wolfe said. "You did not realize that the copier logs jobs with thumbnails for quality control. A vendor's technician posted them to a cloud drive to show fast service. He shouldn't have. Someone saw a thumbnail of a page with the word letter in a bullet point for board discussion and told Mr. Doran that something delectable existed. You did not whisper. Your machine did. But you then compounded it by making an emergency key set for audit access without logging it. Your motive was not malice. It was anxiety and a habit of fixing. You fixed your way into a leak." Kincaid's mouth opened, shut. "I made a spare because Althea leaves at dawn and comes back at midnight. I wanted to be able to put checks in a drawer when she forgets a drawer exists." He swallowed. "I'm so sorry." Althea looked at him with an expression I couldn't read, because it had trust in it and disappointment, and both were too careful to stand up. Mira did not soften, but she didn't strike. Lucy's pencil paused. "So the villain is a copier." "The villain," Wolfe said, "is a man who thrives on other people's neglect. The copier is his hobby horse. Mr. Doran needs the cracks that busy people leave. He is a mortar that pretends to be stone. Enough metaphors. We now require Mr. Holt." He arrived at 11 minutes, shaving 4 off dignity. Tall, silver at the temple in a way that had interns practicing, hand like a contract and smile like a scalpel. He accepted introductions with a nod that graced nobody. When his eyes reached the letter, he graduated to attentive. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "my office will sue you to atoms if you imprison property." "It isn't your property," Althea said cleanly. "It's mine by custody and the city's by right, and it's evidence." Holt gave her the smile he gives reporters who don't last the winter. "Ms. Morn, your zeal is noted." "Mr. Holt," Wolfe said, "your zeal created this document. Sit." Holt sat because his type knows when a judge walks in without robes. Wolfe didn't repeat the lecture. He served the entree. 17 years ago, you bribed Mr. Morn to grant unlawful variances. He left a letter to clutch at honor. This spring, you retained Mr. Doran to prevent Miss Morn from shaming your client by exposing a pattern that began with that bribe. Mr. Doran staged theft, rationed dread, simulated inevitability, and falsified a clause to smear Professor Dorsey, because Mr. Dorsey is loud. You will now choose between public disgrace and private concession. Private concession is this. Caradine will settle Miss Morn's suit on terms that repair harm, end current abuses, and commit to oversight not staffed by your friends. Also, you will dismiss Mr. Doran and confess his works as unauthorized folly. If you choose public disgrace, Ms. Brand will have a first paragraph within the hour, and the district attorney will have a rental slip by morning. Holt regarded the far wall for 3 seconds and then the near letter for 2. You assume, he said, that the press will prefer a narrative without evidence to a counter-narrative with it. You mistake me, Wolfe said. I do not need the press to confess for you. I have the letter. I have a prop ledger. I have a mailbox photograph. I have a consultant who will not bear cross-examination. Moreover, I have the appetite to sit in my chair while you dig yourself out. Silence, of the kind that makes clocks apologize. Pruitt dabbed his forehead with a policy. Doran stared at the carpet and saw a future that involved fewer whiteboards. Dorsey sat very straight, not gloating, which is as loud as academics get. Althea's hands were steady in her lap, and Mira's were stones. Kincaid folded and unfolded smaller. Holt exhaled the faintest concession. Terms, he said, in writing, under counsel. No admissions? Admissions, Wolfe said, are for confessions. You will sign obligations. Mr. Pruitt will draft. Miss Balin will improve. Miss Brand will watch. Lucy smiled like a cat in a dairy. Meanwhile, Wolfe added, Mr. Doran will provide the names of his hired hands and the location where the letter lived. If he is wise, he will also surrender any copies to spare himself the indignity of seeing his work compared unfavorably to paste. Doran lifted his chin. You can't compel me. I can, Wolfe said, because compulsion is merely appetite armed with alternatives. Choose your alternative. He chose it with a swallow. Names, he said, and a storage unit on 12th. No copies. I don't keep trophies. Liar, Lucy murmured, too soft for court, just right for me. Wolfe lifted a palm. We are not finished. There remains the ethical remainder. Miss Morn, you will still disclose the letter on your terms, with context, not as a cudgel you are hiding and are forced to reveal. Your father's shame remains true. You do not cleanse it by directing it. You cleanse by enduring it and refusing its reproduction. She nodded once. It held. Tomorrow, Wolfe said, papers will sign and men will relearn nouns. Tonight you will all leave my house and not return without appointment. He closed his eyes the way a curtain falls between acts. Not because the play is over, because we all need the change. I ushered them out by pairs. Doran paused at the threshold as if he wanted to say he'd enjoyed the performance. I closed the door on his past tense. When the last echo retired, I went back to the office. Wolfe was still. The letter lay where it had decided to live for a while. The room smelled faintly of resin and someone's plans going cold. Well, I said. Bah, he said. Bring Fritz. I want beer and something sweet. We have been used as scenery by a mountebank, and I find I resent even that efficiently. Tomorrow we will extract coin. Tonight we will digest. Wolfe took the beer and the pear tart Fritz produced and ate in silence long enough to make gratitude unnecessary. When he finished, he rang for me with one finger. I was already there. We have a night and a morning. It is sufficient. It wasn't a promise. It was a schedule. The phones started the minute 8:10 turned 8:11. Mira planted in the red chair and laid bricks of language, reading clauses for Wolfe's disapproval. Pruitt called counsel with the tone of a man ordering bespoke bandages. Doran called to clarify scope, pretending it hadn't been caught stealing. I gave Saul the 12th Street storage unit address and codes. He left with a camera. Althea asked for the letter. Wolfe didn't give it. I put it in the wall safe with a peevish watch. "You'll have it when it needs you," he told her. She didn't bristle. Patience is her second trade. At 10, Saul phoned, voice carrying dust. "Shrine to bad ideas," he said. "Props, heat gun, twine-labeled narrative, no copies. A ledger, Doran's hand, 2 payments to Arfane, 1 to Temp, Cap." Wolfe made the small sound that passes for praise and had me ring the elder assistant at the DA who hates cleverness. He sent a courier for the ledger and the rental slip. Wolfe also told Pruitt, "Countersigned by noon, or Miss Brand explores your adjectives." Pruitt whimpered agreement. By midnight, the draft had bones. Carradine would fund remediation at 3 sites and restore tenants where restoration isn't a joke. An independent monitor who does not golf. Doran barred from contact with any group that spells non-profit without air quotes. Mira's commas grew fangs. Pruitt turned must into may. Mira restored shall and looked younger. Wolfe approved with a grunt that would ruin a souffle. Lucy texted, "Embargo 2 p.m. up, if Saints cooperate." We shut down at 1. Althea took Fritz's cocoa and the guest room like a billet. Mira went home to her server. Wolfe sat with eyes closed, finger and thumb pinching what looked like a thread. I did a last circuit, set the locks, and abused the couch until 5:30, when coffee and a notepad waited. Wolfe's handwriting delivers verdicts on white space. Viero to watch Doran's office, Panzer to meet DA Courier, Kincaid to audit copier cloud, Ms. Morn to call board, nouns only. At 9:30, Professor Dorsey returned, tie unfrayed, eyes on sentry. "I've told my chair I'll step off committees until the noise dies," he said. "I won't apologize for being named." "You will not apologize for being loud," Wolfe said. "You will apologize for enjoying it." He took that like a man who has practiced grace, then studied the letter again and said, "He wrote it frightened. He wanted a witness." "We have obliged," Wolfe said. At 10, the DA's man came for the ledger and the rental slip, handling them the way Fritz handles hot pans. He asked for the letter. Wolfe declined, provided scans and the unit address, and requested a subpoena for the rest. The man nodded to gravity and left the air cooler. 11 arrived like a punctual train. Pruitt returned with a partner whose smile had no calories. Mirsha, Althea, and Kincaid formed the opposite flank. The signing took 30 minutes. Mira initialed as if stamping passport control on the future. Althea did not tremble. Pruitt signed like liabilities valedictorian. Doran didn't sign. A footnote forbade his face from Carradine's properties. Wolfe's nod notarized. Noon had a clock and a witness. Lucy arrived to eavesdrop, which for her is penance. Wolfe gave her terms and timeline. Twice she asked if the letter would be included. "Yes," he said, "redacted, context intact." She looked at Althea. "You want your father to be a noun in public?" "He already is," Althea said. "Let the adjective be honest." The press room 2 floors down had air that disliked gatherings. Wolfe didn't attend. I watched Mira turn law into language and Althea turn shame into program. Pruitt read his statement like a man at his dental work. Lucy asked first and third. Others pretended to ask the rest. When it ended, I extracted our principles before absolution got ideas. Fritz answered the prophecy at lunch. Trout rillettes, bitter greens, bread with manners, tangerines that believed in sugar. Afterward, Wolfe said, "One more thing." It arrived. Saul ushered in a man dressed for contrition and failing. Cap had shaved, a bandage hugged his thumb. He hovered until Wolfe aimed him at a chair. "Name?" "Ren Fain." He jerked a chin at Doran. He hired me. Theatre. I pry, I photograph, I tidy. No weapons. You warmed resin, I said. You widened a knot and left a bar. Fane rubbed the bandage. Gun slipped. Wood's better unburned. Mr. Fane, Wolfe said, you will give a statement to the DA, which will lighten your load and shorten your lane. In return, you will not go near Miss Morn's address or any box containing air she has paid for. If you touch my door, I will educate you. Fane nodded, and Saul escorted him like a lamb that had chosen a fence. At 2, Doran, Pruitt, and the partner left for Scanners and the Silence Corporation's rent when learning new tenses. Althea and Mira went to brief the board. Kincaid lingered and asked how to fix a copier leak. Set it on fire, I said, then buy a different brand. He smiled. Dorsey shook Wolfe's hand. I'll write about the appetite for diagrams, without names. Right, Wolfe said. Do not excuse. We sat. The orchids upstairs breathed like a city at 4 a.m. The letter in the safe existed without needing us. You could have kept out, I told Wolfe. This was politics by other means. It was trespass by mediocre means, he said. That offends me more. He closed his eyes. Tonight, lamb properly handled. Afterward, I will say a word about fathers and about the people who hire diagrams for courage. Now, dinner was lamb, roasted and resigned to its fate, with a sauce Wolfe called correct and Fritz called inevitable. I ate mine the way a man eats after spending 48 hours on coffee and suspicion, and Wolfe ate his like a judge delivering sentences. When Fritz cleared, Wolfe drew a breath that promised a verdict. You may think, he said, that the letter has done its work. You are wrong. It is not paper that offends me, Archie. It is presumption. Doran presumed he could sully this house with theatre. Holt presumed law could be bent into a personal utensil. Even Miss Morn presumed she could ration truth until convenient. Presumption must be answered. That was Wolfe's way of closing a chapter, quietly writing the coda in air. I didn't argue, I just waited. He closed his eyes, folded his hands, and let the orchids upstairs claim his silence. The next morning, the phone proved it hadn't gone on strike. First, it was Pruitt, making noises about council ratifying terms. Then Mira, confirming her board had voted to accept the settlement provided signatures came before the Sun lost interest. Then Lucy, who wanted permission to phrase the article as a letter buried and exhumed, which Wolfe dismissed with a grunt. Too obvious, he said. She will do it anyway. At 10 sharp, Saul arrived with a sealed envelope and a camera card. Storage unit yielded nothing else. Fane confirmed Doran liked to check on the merchandise. Took him there twice. Letter never left except to be photographed. These, he tapped the envelope, are the shots. Doran holding the page, gloating. If you want a bow, it's tied. Wolfe didn't open the envelope. He didn't need to. The district attorney has enough to choke him, he said. They will indict Doran for fraud, perhaps for burglary by agency. Holt will be more delicate. The letter is confession, but confession by a dead man. Still, his settlement is cheaper than trial, which is why he agreed. At noon, Althea came back, Mira with her. They looked like they'd crossed a river carrying something fragile. She didn't ask for the letter. She only said, "The board has agreed to make it public in context. I will stand with it." Wolfe nodded once. "Correct." Kincaid followed, pale but not crumbling. "I've dismantled the copier access," he said, as though announcing remission. "No more unlogged thumbnails." "Good," Wolfe said. "You have learned to distrust machines. A belated education, but not wasted." By 2, the contracts were signed in a lawyer's office that smelled of polish and regret. Mira did the cutting. Althea did the breathing. Holt did the minimal. Pruitt did the sweating. Doran didn't appear. His counsel sent a note that sounded like a door, shutting on a career. Lucy's article dropped at 3. She had shaved the adjectives, polished the nouns, and let the facts shine sharp. Wolfe read it with one eyebrow raised, then handed it to me. The headline wasn't what she'd promised. It was better. A letter without a stage. Even Wolfe grunted his approval. When the day settled, I found myself in the office, watching the evening creep through the windows. The letter lay in the safe, silent as it had been under a floorboard. Althea stood once more before Wolfe's desk. "I wanted justice," she said. "I got compromise." "You got survival," Wolfe corrected, "and the chance to continue. Justice is never whole. It is only sufficient. That must content you." She held his gaze. "And my father?" "Your father," Wolfe said, "was a man who failed once and feared the world would remember only that. He wrote a confession not to cleanse himself, but to ensure his ruin would not be misinterpreted. You have turned it into a foundation, not a monument. Accept that." She exhaled. It wasn't relief, it was decision. She thanked him, turned, and went. Mira followed, her stride steady. Kincaid paused at the threshold, as though waiting for absolution, but Wolfe gave him none. He left, smaller but maybe wiser. The brownstone exhaled silence again. Fritz entered with coffee and the evening paper. Wolfe accepted both like tribute. I sat, notebook idle. "You know," I said, "for a man who hates theatricals, you stage a hell of a finale." Wolfe's mouth twitched. "I detest theatre, but sometimes, Archie, men insist on writing plays. My duty is to close the curtain." He lifted his cup, tasted, and nodded once. Satisfactory. That was the last word, because in Wolfe's world, justice doesn't roar. It digests. The evening had folded itself into the brownstone the way a cat folds into a chair, quiet, deliberate, and final. Fritz moved about the kitchen with his own sort of punctuation, the clink of copper and the muffled rustle of herbs, and Wolfe had resumed the immobility that passes for triumph. I'd parked in my chair, waiting for the coda that always comes when he's ready to mark the case complete. "Archie," he said finally, his eyes half shut, "we have concluded a sequence of pretenses. It merits remark." That was my cue. "You mean Doran's theatricals, Holt's polite corruption, Pruitt's sweating, or Miss Morne's insistence on rationing her father's shame?" "All," Wolfe said. Mr. Doran presumed he could arrange inevitability by staging episodes, planks, crowbars, half-pages. A shallow intelligence believes dread is cumulative. In fact, it decays. His pageants exhausted themselves because they lacked substance. Mr. Holt presumed that 17 years buys absolution. He was wrong. Years only make a stain set. Mr. Pruitt presumed a vocabulary could substitute for ethics, and Miss Morne— He paused, and his eyelids lifted. Presumed she could bury truth until she chose to exhume it. "She got away with it," I said. "She obtained survival," he corrected, "and a compromise that will do some good. But her father's act remains. No amount of zeal or virtue can erase a moment of cowardice. The letter will live as his confession and as her inheritance. That duality is the lesson. She accepted it, which is more than most." I let that sit. Wolfe doesn't often give lessons unless he's sure the audience deserves them. Then I said, "And Dorsey, you left him dangling until the last." Wolfe's mouth tightened with faint amusement. "Professor Dorsey enjoys indignation. It is his métier. Doran's attempt to sully him with a counterfeit clause revealed not guilt, but a vulnerability, the peril of being conspicuous. He will survive and perhaps moderate his relish, though I doubt it. Viero's off watching Doran's associates. Panzer's making the DA happy. Lucy's already halfway to a Pulitzer. So that's it? Curtain down?" "Curtain down," Wolfe said. The play was theirs. I was only the critic who refused to leave the theatre until the final line. He reached for his beer, I knew we were close to the line he saves for dessert. The last remark, the one he shapes to sting or to soothe. Archie, he said after a long drink, observe this. Men ruin themselves less by greed than by vanity. Halt's greed bought him secrecy, for a time. Doran's vanity exposed him in weeks. Vanity craves witnesses. That is why he staged his pageants, why he widened a knot and left a crowbar, why he photographed his own contrivance. It was not to control Miss Morn. It was to admire himself through her dread. That was his undoing. He set the glass down gently, the way a verdict lands when it needs no gavel. Vanity, Archie, is more fatal than hunger. Hunger ends when sated. Vanity is never done. I leaned back, grinning. That'll make a fine closing line if Lucy steals it. She will, Wolfe said, but she will cheapen it. He closed his eyes, which meant the day was done. The case was closed, and the world could trouble us again only on schedule. Fritz came in with a tray. Lamb bones, repurposed for stock, bread baked into virtue, and a bottle open to declare peace. Dinner was served. And just like that, the letter she had buried under the floorboards went back to being paper, its power spent, its secret stripped, its noise silenced. The brownstone returned to what it prefers, a fortress of order, with Wolfe in his chair and me close by, waiting for the next fool to knock on our door.